It's time to start. First thing you have to do is to familiarize yourself with the tooling that Weagree equips you with. So I went here to the administrator page where you find all the tooling for administrators of the system to tweak and to configure or set the settings to their liking and to insert templates from here to implement workflows, etc., etc. By default, you arrive on the contract automation view, and I'm going to fold it in so as to make the overview on the left-hand side slightly more peaceful and more clear, maybe. As you can see, it has several items. Contract automation, for us it relates to contract creation, building a questionnaire, answering a questionnaire, etc., etc. Contract lifecycle management, from our point of view, deals with signed contracts and managing deadlines, setting notifications and configuring storage of your contracts. Entity management is the party database where you manage your own parties, so the legal entities on your own side, your corporate tree, org chart related aspects, and what type of data you want to manage your own legal entities on, so the corporate housekeeping, legal entity management, so to say. But it also includes the organizing of the other parties database, so the CRM, as you might call it. Weagree integrates well with external CRM systems like Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce or the like, but you may also keep it within Weagree, and this part basically allows you to configure everything that relates to it. Workflows and approval workflows is what you can deal with as well. I'm not going to step into that. Setting up workflows is really very easy. Once you have defined how your approval workflows run in your organization and where and for what, you need to trigger an approval from someone, and you know who needs to approve, then setting up the Weagree Wizard for approval workflows is really a matter of minutes only. Then there's user and license management, of course. You can define the user roles and access rights based on the licenses, of course, in the first place. That restricts the access to large features, for example, like contract lifecycle management, or for certain users there are certain type of tooling not available, but you can configure for each and every item almost whether a certain person of a certain role can actually access it. And of course you can define roles yourself, and you can go even further and define user profiles. It also deals with user groups. Templates are allocated to user groups. Users are allocated to user groups. Contracts created by end users are in user groups, and how that works and which user with which profile in your organization can access which user groups is what you can configure over here. It goes beyond the scope of this introductory training to step into more of that. Then there are some global lists that you might apply. It's also a little bit technical, so I'm skipping that for now. And there is the configuration of the Weagree Wizard. Now this is worth spend a few minutes more on. If you go to the configuration of the Weagree Wizard, first of all, you have the key functionality that you can switch on portal-wide. If you click on it, you can see that you can switch on contract automation, and of course also switch it off. You can allow contracts to remain confidential, which means that no one else than the end user can see that contract or has the possibility to mark a contract as confidential. We don't see that happen very often, but it's of course something that can be the case, that there are super confidential contracts, the existence of which may not be known to any other users than the persons defined. it's switched off. Versioning and workspace means that you have the possibility to create version 2, version 3 of your negotiations, that you upload schedules and documents that relate to a certain contract, and that you can create compares between them, and basically that you collect your full contract-related file within the Weagree Wizard. It may, of course, be integrated with an external document management system, but with the versioning and workspace switched on, you are basically able to access that external DMS once you've configured it through the API integrations. You can indicate that entities management should not be available on Portal. If you have an existing contract lifecycle management system and you want to migrate the the other system into Weagree because you want to continue have an end-to-end solution with Weagree, we have a migration service and you can switch it on. The migration not only relates to the full transfer of your contract management system into Weagree, but also to the full transfer of your entity management. So if you have all sorts of documentation elsewhere stored, and you have that in an electronic form, you can migrate entity management and CLM into Weagree, and you would need to have the migration service switched on here. Automated analysis refers to the artificial intelligence tooling, meaning that you have the possibility that on the basis of artificial intelligence tooling, a contract is reviewed and that data are extracted from the contract, or that you create your response after analyzing the document that you received from the third party. Then contract lifecycle management. If you're not going to use our CLM, then it makes sense to switch it off. Approval workflows, if you don't require or impose any approvals from anyone in the organization in relation to a contract to be signed or to be generated, then switch it off. Also, if you want to use an external repository URL, it is possible with contracts that you have everything collected elsewhere, and you want within Weagree the possibility to click on a link and go to that elsewhere by simply clicking on the one link. That is something that we have provided for. It's not an integration. It doesn't mean that you save the documents there. It's just it could be a SharePoint site. You're not the saving to the SharePoint site is dealt with separately, but you might still want to have the possibility to go there, and that's external repository URL that you have. Then there are a few matters generally to be configured. For example, contract approvers who need to approve a Q&A answer. By default, you might not want them to change Q&A answer, so only to say approve, reject, and give their comments in relation to approval or rejection. But if you also want to allow them to change a Q&A question, you need to switch on over here. Then for security reasons, you may want to force a log out of an active user after a certain lapse of time. If you do want to have that, you basically indicate here the number of minutes after which Weagree inactivity, Weagree automatically switches off the user. That's for security reasons. Some technical things relating to what you can export, whether you can export it in Excel or in JSON format. Now that's a little bit technical. I'm going to walk through another few things. For example, the API integrations. The way it works, we have quite a number of integrations, for example, with DocuSign, with Dynamics, SharePoint, Salesforce, and probably when you enter it, there are a number of more. It's quite interesting to see how it works. You click basically on activating it. This one is actually activated, and it has the information relating to it here entered. And once you have entered it and switched it on active, you can basically save the changes, and basically your integration with DocuSign in this case would be active. Same applies to Salesforce, SharePoint, Mendix. There may be some other integrations of interest that you can configure over here by entering the details on the right-hand side. And for single sign-on, you can see that under login and user authentication, we have a number of single sign-on plugins, and you can use a number of single sign-on or SAML-based technologies. Same over here. If you want to stick with the Weagree policies, you can configure your password policy, and you can do some settings as to guest users and how that works over here. Notification templates, I'm going to show you that the Weagree Wizard sends out notifications. That's in the Weagree house style, how the notifications are being sent. If you want to adopt your own look and feel of the Weagree notifications, you can modify them over here and tweak the look and feel of the document, the email base format here. Then within this format, all your pieces of text that are in the notifications itself can be modified as well. That's on other places. Then the Weagree Wizard is multilingual, so the interface can be in the Dutch language, French language, Spanish, German, etc., or any language that you wish. You can change that over here, and how that works is the topic of another separate tutorial. If you are not that happy with the look and feel of the portal, you don't like the dark anthracite dark mode as we have it defined over here, or if you don't like the magenta coloring or the main navigation on the top, and you would like to apply your own colors and your own look and feel, then you have very elaborate capabilities over here to provide for what it should look like. Even the e-signing button color can be set and configured over here. It's all to your liking. Well, that is basically to introduce you to the admin tooling that we have. Let's finish with few introductory words on the tooling on the administrator side. If you unfold contract automation, first thing you see on the right-hand side are the templates that are potentially visible on the new contract page. You can access a Q&A from a template by clicking on the question mark icon, and it allows senior users typically, or it allows the administrators to modify and reformulate Q&A questions, to add an explanatory note to it, to reset the default answer to a question, all things that we will address during the forthcoming admin training sessions. User feedback, I already introduced you to it in the previous video, configuring the house styles and how it looks like, and the dot files that format your Word document, define the font of your documents, it defines the margins, the way the clauses number, which type of clauses you have, and how it looks like in the underwater screen. You deal with it over here, and it's also the topic of another tutorial. Now, for now, I think it's time that we really start working on inserting the template creation tool, as we call it. Click not on the name of the template, but on the icon that basically allows you to edit the template in the template creation tool. If you only need to tweak the formulation of a Q&A question, then all you need to do is basically click on the item with the question mark on it. It will open a pop-up with all the Q&A questions that are triggered throughout the template. But if you want to change the text, you would click on the template over here. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm switching to another view, basically when you arrive there, then this is the template creation tool. And what you do see here is the template that we are now in the next admin trainings going to insert into the Weagree Wizard. So here's the evaluation license agreement. I'm going to introduce you to the template creation tool, TCT we sometimes call it. What you see over here is a big gray field on the right hand side. That is because we are opening always on the template holder, the template carrier if you wish. But if you unfold the items in the left hand side, you will probably recognize that this is somehow the structure of your contract. And let me see the evaluation license agreement that we are going to insert throughout the next admin trainings. If you would go through that one and get to the clause itself, you will recognize that there's first of all a parties block, then you have a background clause with the preamble, list of definitions, and then Article 2 on evaluation license, basically the core of the contract that we are going to insert right now. Now, if you look into the template creation tool, you will see that the structure here on the left hand side is sort of following this contract. Parties block in the beginning, then there's a background clause, then there's for definitions, and then you have an article evaluation license. And if I go back to the Word document, you will see that it has 2.1 license grant, license scope, and then number of persons, and a sort of temporal scope of the license. And if you look into the template, you will see that it really follows the structure. Then if I would click on a clause, you would see that the content will become available on the right hand side. And if we are now going to analyze what we see, there's a lot of information right now on the screen, but if we take a little bit our time, and I recommend that you do that, there are a few things that are remarkable over here. First of all, on the left hand side, you have the structure of your template. You have the structure, and the gray parts, I haven't said that yet, but the gray parts signify that these are taken from the clause library, and there's no big surprise that the confidentiality clause is usually taken from the clause library, just like dispute resolution clause, parties block, and a signature block. If you think of it, for every contract, roughly they would be the same. You would pick the same type of parties block for almost all of your agreements. Now, if we look further, then you see that we have these clause structures, and then let's focus a little bit on the button bars. There are 4 button bars. On the lower left hand side, you have a button bar that deals with building the structure. The lower left button bar allows you to change the clause name that you've inserted, to focus on this contract clause, to delete the contract clause if you don't need it anymore, or if you've made a terrible mistake or you want to replace it by a new clause. You want to add this to the clause library. And of course, if you would like to add extra clauses, you would click on Add a New Clause below, indent it, or build a Q&A question. Then there are a few buttons that are relatively straightforward: copy, cut, and paste. If you want to copy and paste a clause or a subclause from here, you might do so. Typically, you would do that from the clause library, of course. So if you want to reuse a certain clause, you would put it in the clause library and then take it from the clause library for elsewhere in the template. But sometimes it's just easier to copy, cut, and paste. For example, if you only need to make minor modifications, then it's very helpful to just copy paste. If the order of clauses needs to change, then you have buttons for moving it up and down, and also to change the indentation. You can correct any errors that you make. On the right hand side, you deal with the content. So the button bars on the right hand side are basically focused on the content of the agreement. The lower right button bar is about formatting of the clauses, bold, italic, and not only the clauses but also the tiny words that are highlighted halfway the clause. For example, over here, if you want to have it bold, you use that. Then, when I click through the clauses, you will see that there's the drop down on the right hand side, which deals with the formatting of the clauses in terms of which type of paragraph needs to apply. Let's go back to the Word document where, and I'm going to focus in, zoom in, where you see that these clauses number differently than those clauses, and here are clauses that are numbering on the level 1, this should be a level 2 clause, and then this would be a level 3 clause. And then there are some slightly differently numbering whereas clauses, as we call it, party clauses, yet numbering in a different way, but you don't want these numbering to interfere with the article numbers. So we have created separate styles for that. Like we also have a body text and normal text, or default text as you wish. Let's go back to that and open the drop down. If you carefully analyze what you find in the drop down, you will see that you can allocate level 1, level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You don't need more than 6 typically, that will be really rare. Then for definitions you can define definition styles and sub-items, and sometimes definitions may have sub-items if you wish. Schedule headings, annex headings, chapters, and there may be bullet points if you wish. In the agreement you should not do that, of course, but if you do, then there are styles for separately or differently indenting bullet points. And you can define them in what I already introduced to you, the .x files. Then we have parties clause, a whereas clause, default clauses without spacing, and body text with some spacing. Let me point you at that. If you look into the Word document, you will see that there's a tiny little bit of white spacing immediately underneath this clause, which is not underneath the clause over here. And you can see actually the difference, that this one is a default clause eventually, and then this one with spacing is what we call body text clause. And if you go back into the Weagree Wizard, you would see that there's that different default or body text. We're going to play with this and we're going to elaborate on this a lot. So if you're getting a little bit fuzzy right now, don't worry. The last part of this admin training, what I would like to highlight are frequently used buttons. But first, the lower right button bar deals with the formatting of the agreement. So bold, italic, underline, insert a table, the paragraph styling. The upper right button bar deals with inserting tags. If you want to trigger a Q&A question, an editable field, a drop down or a radio button, or if you want to trigger the end user who's answering a questionnaire to insert a date from a date picker, you would basically use this button and put the field, the tag triggering such question underneath here. And then on the left hand side you have button bars that deal with the libraries, like the clause library, a library of definitions, library with all standard schedules and annexes that you would deal with centrally, and you will have a library of what we call global questions. We'll come back to those concepts later on during the admin training. And then there are 4 button bars that I would like to highlight and that you're going to use more or less often, which is, first of all, if you modify anything here in the text, you need to save it. If you don't save the text, then you will get a pop-up, and do not click away the pop-up because your changes will not be saved if you OK the pop-up. Control the change, save the changes made, and they are put and final in your template. Then, if you had inserted certain Q&A questions over here, and you made a mistake, you want to reformulate it while you are here and not in the pop-up that you can access from the administrator page, then from here you have the possibility to modify the Q&A elements. It allows you to, whether the clause for license fee needs to be inserted or the Q&A question asking what the amount of the license fee is. How this pop-up works and how we're going to work with it is the topic of one of the next admin trainings in the second part of the series. So don't need to bother with that. I just wanted to point you at the frequently used question for modifying your Q&A question, in addition to save the changes made. Then here on the left-hand side, you can open another template. You can access the clause library. And if you want to make a change, search replace all, then you would do that here as well. Now, this should have introduced you to the template creation tool. What we are going to do in these admin trainings is you are going to insert, on the basis of our training template, an evaluation license agreement. And yes, we can handle all type of contracts. During the admin trainings, you will learn basically the most frequently used Q&A type of questions and introduce the tooling that you will definitely use all across your trainings. Sometimes there are specialties that or things used more infrequent, but you might need to access them, and then you have the switch here on the right hand side, and now that's the final step in this administrator training. And I recommend that you're not going to switch it to green, but there are more tooling, there is more available for inserting a picture, for dealing with language-related parts, for modifying party details if you want to have extra fields, etc., etc. If your contract contains columns and not a table, then that may be something that you deal under the specialty button. Now, that's beyond the scope of this training. As I already said in my previous training sessions, we have tutorials for those on the Weagree website. And for now, let's start insert our own template.